Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf kaftet. This is the daf for Hoshana Raba. We're going to basically get started now, or return to where we were in the middle of, which is trying to find the source, which we've been struggling with. How do we know that if you have a machshava, a thought, chutz limkomo, that you're going to eat the meat, or sprinkle the blood, or burn the parts on the altar, outside the time frame that it was allowed to be, that's going to be pigul, and which you're going to get karet for. And if it's chutz limkomo, outside the boundaries where it's permitted, that's going to basically disqualify the korban, but you're not going to get karet if you eat kezayit of the meat. Okay, remember, the karet is always for someone who eats it. So we're going to have a slew of drashot, right? We've been trying to figure this out. We keep getting stuck. So came Rava, and he basically said, just to remind you, he learns everything from Perek Zayin and Vayikra, right? We have Perek Zayin where it talks about it, and Perek Yud Tet. And we tried to suggest before that maybe one is learned from one and one is learned from the other, but no. Rava says it's all learned from that one long pasuk. Im ha'achel ya'achel m'basar zevach shlama b'yom ha'shlishi lo yiratzeh makriv oto lo yichashev lo. A very long, convoluted pasuk. If you eat from the meat of the sacrifice of the shlamim on the third day, okay, and then Rava went and darshaned all these parts of the pasuk. Lo yiratzeh will not be accepted. Hamakriv oto, the one who sacrifices it, lo yichashev lo, will not be considered for him. Okay, again, we're going to define all these things later. Pigul yihiyet, this will be pigul. And a nefesh ha'ochel mimenu avonatisa, the person will get punished. It doesn't say karet there. We're going to learn that also. So what did we start with? Shtei achilot, chad achilat adam, chad achilat mizbeach. Ha'achol ya'achel means we're talking about a thought that relates to something burning on the altar or being eaten by a person, either eaten by the altar or eaten by the person. That's why it's zrika, achila, and burning. Basar zevach shlamav says it's only things that are like like shlamim, where it has both elements of mefaglim and mitpaglim. I'm not going to go back to that. We saw that yesterday. Shlishi is chutz lizmano. In other words, I'm at the end of kafchet on bed again. I'm going back right now. Shlishi teaches you chutz lizmano, but yom shlishi, that's if you eat it. Again, your thought is that you're going to eat it outside the frame, the time frame. Lo yeratzeh means kartzat kasher ken artzat pasul, right? Just like hartzat kasher yakrivu kol matirav, it's only going to be disqualified if everything is done properly, other than the pigul thought. Hamakriv is b'hakrava nifsal and not b'shlishi. Okay, meaning it's in, and this is what we're going to come back to later. It's in the sacrificing of it at the moment of sacrifice, meaning a thought messes it up. But it's not disqualified if somebody eats it 3 days later. That's not going to disqualify the korban. Now, you're not allowed to do that. That's no tar. You're going to get karet for doing it, but it won't disqualify the korban. And later we're going to see that maybe somebody thinks it is that, talking about that. Oto, okay, why am akriv oto, the one who sacrifices it? Bizevach hakatu b'daber ve'eno medaber b'kohen. This teaches you, we're going to come back to this drasha also later, that it's talking about the sacrifice, okay? It is disqualified, and the Kohen who did this, the pigul thought, is not actually disqualified. Which is an interesting thought, to think that maybe the Kohen would be disqualified from doing avoda again, right? We're all disturbed by the fact that the Kohen can mess up this korban for somebody else, the Kohen's thoughts, right? From the very first daf of our Masechet. Machshava shelo lishma, right? Disqualifies a korban, and then the person, or maybe you could still bring the korban, but the person has to bring a new one in its place, right? Where's the responsibility of the Kohen? Today we're going to address it from certain elements. So here we're saying that actually is not the Kohen who becomes disqualified. It's the sacrifice that becomes disqualified, because it could have just said amakriv. Why it said amakriv oto? It's the focus is on the sacrifice, the disqualification. Lo yechashev, lo yareh bo machshavot achirot. Okay, this teaches you, Rashi says, mikan la machshavot shemotziot zo mizo. Then a machshavet psul means it's not going to be pigul, right? If you had some other thought, like a lo lishma, then it's not going to be an issue. Okay, this we're going to talk about later. Today we're going to get to this in the next Mishnah, that if you thought chutz lizmano and chutz limkomo, then it's actually not pigul, because there's something else it's not, it's disqualified, but it's not karet, because there's something else that's disqualifying it as well. Okay, now we get to finally what we were looking for, because we said, okay, going back to the beginning, we had, right, shlishi is chutz lizmano, by yom shlishi. Now it says later on in the pasuk, because we're going through the order of the pasuk, pigul ze chutz limkomo. When it says pigul yiyeh, the word pigul, even though we normally think pigul is chutz lizmano, is actually referring to chutz limkomo. Okay? because the word bayom shlishi was referring to a thought about eating it later on the third day, which is already too late. So the pigul word must be related to chutz l'mkomo, and that's how we get them both in the same pasuk. Now we still don't know why only one gets karet. We'll get there soon. What about the word yihiyeh, pigul yihiyeh? Milamed shemitztarfim zeim ze. Okay, by the way, I'm already at the top of kaftet now. Yihiyeh means they combine together. Like if you have a machshava of, I'm going to eat a half a kazayit, which is not a full shiur, after the time frame, and I'm going to eat a half a kazayit outside the place, you can actually disqualify the korban. You won't get karet because you don't have a complete kazayit, which is a minimum requisite amount of a pigul of chutz lizmano, but it is enough to disqualify the korban. Here comes the key. This is what we were looking for. One of them gets karet, not the other, because a nefesh ha'ochelet mimenu is singular. So someone who eats from it, only one of these is going to avonot tisa, which avonot tisa we learned already before. We're going to go back there. Is learned from notar, and notar it says karet because there it says also avonot tisa. So we're going to learn that it's also karet here, but only for one of them. Ve'eza, which one? Ze chutz lizmano. Okay, the one that's chutz lizmano. Why chutz lizmano? Well, the gamar avon minotal. The dami le bezav. This we had yesterday already. That it was, we learn avon from notar. There's a gzera shava. It says avon in this pasuk, and it says avon by if you leave over the meat and you eat it, and there it says you get karet. So here also you get karet. How do we know, though, specifically chutz lizmano? Because it's similar to it in zayin bet, right? Zav is the rashi tevot. Remember this? Zman and bama. Okay, they're both issues that relate to time. One is a thought, I'm going to eat it outside the right time, and the other is I actually ate it outside the right time. And bama means they're both relevant when we have babot outside, right? Out bamot that are external to the temple. Again, the time of the temple you can't do this, but for that you're allowed to have bamot. And there's no issue of makom there. There's no space issue. So chutz l'mkomo is not a disqualification, but notar and pigul would, yes, be an issue. So therefore, since it's more similar to notar and the whole thing is learned out from notar, we're going to actually learn that. So that is Rava. That's Rava's explanation. It all comes from this one pasuk. From this one pasuk, you get both chutz lizmano, chutz l'mkomo, and you get that only one of them is karet. Which one is that? It's going to be chutz lizmano. Amalei Rav Papa Rava. By the way, if you can't remember, this is a very easy way to remember. If you get confused, chutz l'mkomo, chutz lizmano, which is the one that gets karet, it's obvious because the whole context of these psukim is notar, leaving over the meat beyond its time. And therefore, the one that's going to get karet is going to be the one that's similar to that, which is the thought about leaving it beyond its designated time. Amalei Rav Papa Rava. Ledidach shlishi beparchat kedoshim tiyu my darshipe. So Rav Papa says to Rava, but then what do you do with that pasuk in Yutet? Right? We saw the pasuk in Yutet. Okay. So in Vayikra Yutet it says, Im ha'achel yachel. It says the same thing again. By Yom HaShlishi pigul lo yaratzen. If you remember, and ochlav avonu yisa, right? It seems to repeat this whole thing, and it mentions pigul there. It mentions the eating at the third day. And we said before, maybe one is chutz lizmano, one is chutz l'mkomo. But according to this interpretation, that everything's learned from Vayikra Zayin, what's the one in Parshat Kedoshim in Yutet? Do it. So ahu mebayile lemakom sheyeh meshulash bedam bebasar ube'imurim. The Shlishi teaches you that in order for it to be pigul, and I'm going with Tosfot's commentary here, there's a big machloket Rashi Tosfot how to understand this. Tosfot seemed to be the more simple, more intuitive reading. In order for a pigul machshava to be a problem, according to Tosfot, you have, the way that we understand this mishulash, has to be a thought that is equivalent to the dam, the basar, and the imurim. What does that mean? So the blood has to be sprinkled generally in the azara, okay, or for some in the hechal even. Can't be outside the azara, okay? But the meat, if it, let's say it's kodshim, it has to be eaten also in the azara. If it's kodshim kalim, it can be eaten in all of Jerusalem. So if I'm doing kodshim kalim, like a shlemim, and I sacrifice it with a thought that I'm going to sprinkle the blood outside the azara, but somewhere in Jerusalem, that is not a disqualification because it has to be something that the dam and the basar and the imurim, the parts that burn on the altar, all of them can't be done in that place. Now, if I can eat the meat in that area, then that's not going to be pigul, okay? It has to be, in order for this to be pigul, it has to be that my thought Again, this is not for karet. This is just to disqualify because chutzim kamo is only, right, there's no karet. But in order to disqualify chutzim kamo, it has to be a space. So, for example, if it was kodshim kalib, I would have to say, right, I'm slaughtering this with the intent to eat it or sprinkle the blood, right? Either which one, outside Jerusalem. Because even though the sprinkling of the blood can happen in Jerusalem, so if I said, let's say, sprinkle the blood outside Jerusalem, that's chutzim kamo, it won't be disqualified because I could actually eat the meat in Jerusalem. So it would have to be, my thought, even about the blood, would be outside Jerusalem. So that's what he does with that other pasuk in Kedoshim. So that's Rava's answer to Rav Papa's question. So now the Gemara asks, Tepukle mikra kama, why don't we learn this from the earlier pasuk? Im hachol yachel, why don't we learn from the pasuk in Perek Zayin? Because there, mida'avka rachmana belashon shlishi. In that pasuk, it already uses shlishi, and it doesn't need to, because, okay, let's just look again. It says, Vanutar mi basar zevach bayom shlishi ba'esh yisaref, okay, if you leave it over till the third day. And then it says in the next pasuk, and if you eat it, bayom shlishi, on the third day, we already know, we're already saying you can't eat it on the third day. And if you do, you wouldn't need 3 there. So why don't you just say that already teaches us this issue of the threesome. It needs, again, mishulash bedam bebasar b'imurim. So Amar Rav Ashi, Amarita l'shmata kameta Rav Matna. I said this before Rav Matna. Amar li, and as I brought up this question, and he said, no, you can't learn it from the pasuk of Vayikra Zayin. Why not? Imehatam hava mina shlishi prat pigul klal. I would have thought there it says Bayom Shlishi, that's very specific. It would have to be this, right, the threesome together. It would have to be a place that neither of the 3 could be, eaten or used or done. And then it says, though pigul yeh, which already is general. No matter what, it's going to be pigul. And then, naseh klal, mosif ala prat, v'yidrabu shar makamot. And then you would say, oh, well, when you start with a prat and then you go to a klal, we usually say that includes all sorts of other cases. And maybe then you would say that includes even if, let's say the blood can't be sprinkled there, but the meat could be eaten there, maybe that would be a problem of chutzim kamo, and therefore kamash v'lam. That's why we didn't use this pasuk. And that's why in the end, we have an answer to Rav Papa's question. Rava uses the pasuk in Parshat Kedoshim for that drasha of the Mishulash, and we couldn't have really learned it from here. Now, this was all assuming. Until now, we've been assuming im ha'achel ya'achel is specifically talking about a case of thoughts about eating it outside its time or outside its place. But it's not really the simple reading of the pasuk. And we're now going to see a drasha, a braita, where there is an opinion that says it's actually talking about you're going to get punished if you eat it beyond its time. And it's talking about someone who eats it and not the machshava during the time of the sacrifice. So here goes our braita. Tanu Rabbanan. V'im ha'achel ya'achel mi basar zevach shlamav. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Kof oznecha lishmoa. Bend your ear to hear. Okay, like really listen. B'mechashev le'echol mizivcho b'yom shlishi ha'katuv medaber. As it sounds like it's talking about specifically someone who has intention. Okay, like we thought until now. Oh, eino ella. Or they suggest, but maybe not. Maybe it's not like Rabbi Eliezer said. Maybe it's ella be'ochel mizivcho b'yom shlishi. Maybe it's someone who eats from the korban on the third day. Maybe that's the context. Maybe that's the meaning of this pasuk. To which they say, Amarta achal shu kashil yachzor v'yipasel. They say, what kind of thing would this be? Okay, so they say, this doesn't make any sense to say it's talking about someone who eats it. Why? Because basically we're going to say, the Kohen sacrifices the korban on Sunday. And everything's fine. And he does everything right. And 3 days, right, and the third day, so Sunday could be Monday, okay, already by Tuesday, day number 3, it's disqualified. If you eat it on Tuesday, your whole korban is going to be disqualified retroactively. Now, normally, that's not what we say. We say no tares if I eat the meat too late, right? So I've ruined the meat, okay? Not that I've ruined the meat. The meat is beyond its designated time. If I eat it, I get karet for eating it. But no one ever says the korban is disqualified. But now they're saying maybe that's what this is saying. Pigul yeh lo yeratzeh, the korban won't be accepted. So on Tuesday, retroactively, it turns out the korban you brought on Sunday was not accepted. So they respond and they say, that's ridiculous. Where do we have a precedent that on Tuesday we're going to disqualify retroactively a sacrifice that was already done on Sunday and everything was fine? It doesn't make any sense. So that's Rabbi Eliezer's response. Marlo Rabbi Akiva says, what do you mean? Of course we have precedent for this kind of thing. Okay, what is it? Not a korban, but something else. Okay, so a zav and a zava on their 7th day, okay, they go to the mikveh in the morning, and then they wait till sunset. They're called a tvul yom. We've seen this before. And a shomeret yom keneged yom. This is a zava ketana. This is a woman who saw blood, not in the time of her general menstruating, time period, and she sees blood for a day or 2 days. So the first day she sees, she waits to see what happens the next day. She's called shomeret yom keneged yom. You have to wait a day, see what happens. But you can actually go to the mikveh in the morning and just wait till sunset to be completely pure. And that day, you're really b'chazkat hara. As soon as you go to the mikveh, so you're tvul yom, but you're basically considered pure at that point. Okay? And if you touch things, they're fine. Unless you happen to see blood. Now, if you see blood before the end of that day, well, then whatever you touched or came in contact with is actually disqualified. And not to mention your tefillah is kind of undone, right? Your mikveh was useless because now you saw blood again. So, and then you have to wait another day, and then if it's 3 days, you become a zav gdola. Okay? But either way, all these people, or the zav and the zava, who are on their 7th day, and they go to the mikveh in the morning, right? So, if they end up seeing blood that day, well, it's canceled, right? Even though they went to the mikveh, it doesn't matter. And again, retroactively, anything they touch will become impure. Okay, after they've gone to the mikveh, they actually don't pass on impurity anymore. But they're also they can't eat truma and things like that. So anyway, the point is, later, you can disqualify your ches katara. You can break, we thought you were good, but it turns out you weren't. So, he says, right, right, and since they saw blood, then later in the day, it cancels whatever happened earlier, and anything they came in contact with is now retroactively impure. So what are you concerned about this? It could be later, when you didn't eat the meat the way you were supposed to. You didn't fulfill all the criteria of the korban that you were supposed to do. Then, right, and you ate it on the 3rd day. Then retroactively, it's disqualified. So, Amar lo, harei omer, so now comes Rabbi Eliezer and says, no, but I can get it from the pasuk, that it's clearly not talking about someone who ate on the 3rd day disqualifies the korban. We're talking about a psul of machshava, because what does it say? Of thought. On the time when you're sacrificing, because it says, harei omer hamakriv, right? It says hamakriv oto, the one who's sacrificing it. That obviously connects it with the time of the sacrificing. B'shat hakrava unifsal ve'eno nifsal b'shlishi. It's disqualified at the time of sacrificing, not on the 3rd day. Oh, eno omer hamakriv ela zeh kohen hamakriv. So now they say, wait, but when it says hamakriv, maybe it means then who, right? The problem is the kohen. Maybe again, going back to what we suggested earlier today from the end of yesterday's stuff, that maybe it's the kohen who sacrifices. The one who sacrifices it is actually disqualified, not the korban itself. No, it says hamakriv oto. The focus is, it could have just said, if it wanted to say the kohen is pasul, it would have said hamakriv, but it says hamakriv oto. The one who sacrificed it, focus being on the korban itself, and that's why it's the korban that's disqualified b'zevach and not b'kohen. The kohen's not the one who's disqualified. But you see here that Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama were really siding on the side that it's actually someone who eats it, and that if someone eats it beyond the designated time, that retroactively disqualifies the korban, and that means that pasuk is not talking about a pigul machshava. Okay, that's pretty radical because that's not how we've understood pigul until now. And you see, they go against him and they kind of discredit that opinion, but it does appear here as an opinion. Now, we already darshan this word oto at the end of this drasha, this back and forth with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Ben Azai is going to have a different drasha on oto. Ben Azai omel, and from there we're going to get on to drashot of Ben Azai and Acherim. Oto matomud lomar. Lefisha ne'amau. Now, why does it say oto? Makriv oto. Oto is one of these words that means when you sacrifice this, you will get the punishment, which is karet, but not something else. So what else could it be? Well, here's another case of a korban that you kind of messed up, and yet it won't be disqualified. Okay? Well, your korban will still be accepted. What is that? Lefisha ne'amar lo ta'acher l'shalmo. Don't delay. This is a pasuk about if I make a neder and I promise I'm going to bring a korban to the Beit HaMikdash, I can't delay. I have to bring it within 3 regalim. Generally, we say, although there's some different opinions about how long I have. But if I pass that time, some people say it's a year. Okay. Yachol af ma'acher nidro below yeratzeh. So you might think someone like that. If you give your korban too late, you promised you were going to bring it, you didn't bring it. Maybe your korban's not accepted. Too late. You missed your chance. Talmud lomar oto below yeratzeh ve'ena ma'acher nidro below yeratzeh. No, only this korban below yeratzeh, but not someone who pushes off bringing their korban. Acherim omrim. We already learned that we attribute acherim to Rabbi Meir. Lo yechashev b'machshava unifsal ve'eno nifsal b'shlishi. Okay, here's a different drasha of how do we know that it's not. Okay, this goes back to the beginning of our braita where we said maybe it's from eating it that's going to disqualify it, not your thoughts. But it says lo yechashev. Lo yechashev teaches you this has to do with machshava. Okay, because the root machshav, to think, has to do with your thoughts and not from actually your actions of eating it in the wrong time. Uben Azai, what does he say? Bezevach hakatum medaber ve'eno bekohen minale. Oh, sorry. Now we're going back to Ben Azai. Okay, so that's the end of the braita. And now they're asking. Ben Azai, bezevach hakatum medaber ve'eno bekohen minale. If we use the oto to say the oto is teaching us it's about the sacrifice and not about the person sacrificing it, it's not that the Kohen's disqualified from doing work in the temple in the future. Well, how does he get that if he doesn't use the word oto for that? Because remember, his oto was to say this sacrifice, not a neder that you delayed. Either he learns it from acherim. Okay, let's look at Rashi to help us with that. So how do we get it from acherim? So Rashi says, 5 lines from the bottom, at least in my Gemara, right? Now, he said, right, it's not disqualified on day number 3. Because it's obvious it's talking about the sacrifice and not the Kohen. Because if it had to do with the Kohen, and the Kohen was the one who was going to be disqualified, Rashi says, once you suggest that perhaps, no, in the end we rejected it from a drasha, but from a drasha, not because it theoretically could have been that the onus was on the person who ate it. Well, if the onus is on the eating it on the 3rd day, if you think that the pasuk could be meaning that, then you obviously don't think the Kohen is the one who's disqualified here, because the Kohen would be disqualified if I was the Kohen sacrificing the korban and then for someone else and they decide to eat their korban on the 3rd day when they're not allowed. That's not my fault at all, right? I have no responsibility there. So the fact that they even suggested that, right, that acherim had to have a drasha to say it's not the Kohen, means that if we even thought it was the Kohen, for sure we're not talking about if it could have been the eating of it on the 3rd day, for sure it's not the Kohen who's disqualified. Okay, so that's how he gets it. Or the word ritzoi lo yeratzeh that appears in that pasuk is it won't be accepted, right? That's a korban. The focus is on the korban itself won't be accepted, not the person. We don't talk about a person being mirutzeh, right? That's not the word we use. Uben Azai, another question about Ben Azai. A drashad. We're going to ask now. Another question on Ben Azai. What did he say? Oto below yeratzeh ve'em acher nidro below yeratzeh. Right? The oto was all telling you not if you pushed off your vow, right? And you didn't bring it. That's not going to be not accepted. But question on Ben Azai. Mehacha nafka. You're learning it from there. Mita acherim nafka. We should learn it from a different source that acherim brought. Now we're bringing a different statement of acherim. Tanya. Acherim omrim. Okay, from here we're going to move to Amud Bet. Yachol yehe bechor she'ibrash nato. You might have thought, now, a bechor is the firstborn animal. You're supposed to sacrifice it within the 1st year of the animal's life. What if you delayed and you didn't bring it? So yachol yehe bechor she'ibrash nato, that passed its 1st year of life and you didn't bring it yet. Kipsulei hamukdashim v'yipasel. Maybe it's like a sacrifice that was disqualified because it wasn't brought in time. And then what do? You wait till it gets a blemish, right? You can't bring it on the altar. You wait till it gets a blemish. You sell it. You bring the value as a korban, right? But you kind of missed your opportunity. Talmud Lomar, how do we know that that's not true? Because it says, you should eat before God. Okay, you should bring the maaser, the tithes, all your tithes. right? That's the Maser Sheni. And it says, Bechor b'karcha v'tzonecha. These are things you're supposed to bring to Yerushalayim. The second tithe and the Bechor of your Maser, of your animals, and the Bechor of your firstborn animals, and the Maser, the 10th of your animals. And, right, sacrifice them, eat them in Jerusalem. Now we're going to make a hekesh, these two things are juxtaposed. We're going to learn one from the other. Ma Maser ino nifsal mishana l'chaverta. Your Maser, if you bring it late, there's no issue. Af Bechor ino nifsal mishana l'chaverta also won't be disqualified from one year to the other. So why didn't we just learn it from here? If lo ya'acher nidro, right? If you delay bringing up commitment you gave, here also you delay bringing Bechor. Why couldn't we learn from Bechor to Neder, and then we wouldn't use Oto in our pasuk about pigul, right, to teach us that? To which they answer, no, it's drich. Why? You need it, because you wouldn't have been able to learn from Bechor. Salgadat zachamina hanimili Bechor delav bar hatza'ahu. Aval kodshim debnei hartza'aninu emalo liratzu. The whole issue of ritzui is all about sacrifices that you bring that are somehow atoning for you. Okay, even neders atone for you somehow, right? Because we learned in Ola, for example, brings atonement. Even right, because it atones for positive commandments that I didn't fulfill. Even shlamim, supposed to create a good relationship between me and God. That's a type of ritzui. But a bechor is just an obligation I have to bring my firstborn to God. That's a gift to God. It's not a ritzui. It doesn't need. There's no sort of acceptance on behalf of God. So you can't necessarily learn from Bechor to Neder, and that's why better to learn it from our pasuk of Oto. Just this one is Lo Yiratzeh, but other similar ones like not bringing your Neder on time, that would actually be accepted. Kamash Malan. That's why we needed the other drasha of Ben Azai. But now they say, but here's another one. You could have learned it from Akati Mehatam Nafka. And these are all better because our pasuk has nothing to do with Neder at all. It has to do with pigul, no tar, nothing to do with right. Nothing to do with Neder. So now they say maybe we should learn from the Neder pasuk itself. It says Vayikra. So what do we darshan from that, right? If you don't bring it on time, you will have a sin on you, and not lo b'korban chachet. Very obvious drasha. You will have a sin, but nothing will be wrong with your sacrifice. So Ben Azai Ahume Baile, he needs it for a different drasha. It's fascinating drasha, especially for a woman. Vayikra v'lo b'ishtechachet. What this is saying is, the sin will be on you and not on your wife. If you don't bring your neder on time, right? How many times do we get blamed for something our spouses do? Okay, right? It reflects poorly on you as well. Well, this one, no. If you bring it late to the temple, it's your responsibility, not your wife's. Now you might say, okay, it's true. Sometimes poor behavior of a spouse might reflect poorly on the other, but what? Who would think she would get a sin? I mean, that's a weird thing to say. My husband commits to bring a sacrifice, doesn't bring it on time. What? I should get punished for it? Well, here's why you might have thought. And then again, Hayab Chachet is used by Ben Azai for this, and then it's not free to teach about the neder, that your korban is not going to be disqualified. And that's why in the end he learns it from pigul. Sal Gadat HaChamina, you might have thought, Ho'il v'amar Rabbi Elazar v'yitem Rabbi Yochanan, one of them said this, Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Yochanan, Ein ishto shel adam meta, ela im ken mevakshim mimenu mamon ve'en lo. The reason why a wife of a man might die before her time, okay, again, no one really knows when her time is, nobody knows really when this is, but a woman, okay, it's written the negative. A wife of a husband won't die before her time unless, meaning this is what could cause her to die early. If he, now, the way we understand this is, because it comes from Mishlei, and the context there is someone who steals. If someone steals and doesn't have the money to pay back what they stole, then their wife will get punished for it. Okay, their wife could die young. It's very tragic, right? She dies before her time because the husband stole something and didn't return it. It's a way of also disincentivizing people to steal things when they know they won't be able to return the money. But you have to understand these, take them with a grain of salt, right? They're kind of there as threat, right? This is, don't do this, avoid this. But where do we get it from? It's actually rooted in a pasuk in Mishlei, Proverbs, Shneimar, V'im en lecha l'shalem, lama yikach mishkavcha mitachtecha. And if you don't have what to pay, right, in the end, they're going to take, right, try not to do this and get yourself into this situation, because otherwise they're going to end up taking your wife from the one sleeping from under you. What is that? That's your wife. So now you're going to think, okay, now here they're very similar. One is you're supposed to pay back something you stole and you didn't. And the other is you're supposed to pay something you committed to God and you didn't. So you might think that maybe, right, maybe your wife will also die for a sin like that. Kamashmalan. That's why it comes to teach you, no, she won't act for that. Okay, Acherim Omrim. Now we're going to go back to the statement we saw before, that was quoted before in the braita. B'machshava unifsal ve'enu nifsal b'shlishi. Right? Again, we saw a few different drashot where we get this, but it's disqualification of machshava and not b'shlishi. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer lo yechashev my avidle. Now Rabbi Eliezer, who didn't darshan it from here, okay, Rabbi Eliezer just said, remember he said, right, how do you know which one it is? And in the end he said, right, it doesn't make any sense that it was kasher and that it'll be disqualified. But why didn't he learn it from this drasha of, lo yechashev, right? That it's b'machshava and not by the, from eating it. So Rabbi Eliezer, lo yechashev my avidle. What does he do with lo yechashev? He didn't learn it from there. Because remember, he said there's just no precedent for this kind of thing. And Akiva said there is a precedent. So he uses it for what we saw before. Lo yechashev, that was exactly at the very top of our daf. Lo yechashev, these drashot we're seeing kind of overlap with each other. Okay, we're seeing them kind of in different orders, but we're going back to things we saw before. That's how we know that if you have a machshava of chutz l'mkomo and then chutz l'zmano, or perhaps even the opposite order, but if it's going to be disqualified for some other machshava, or you had a lo lishma machshava, then it won't be pigul. And you won't get karet for it. So that's what he does with lo yechashev. For Rabbi Meri Matnei, Amar Rabbi Yanai, he had a different drasha on lo yechashev. This is a third drasha. Minayin lemechashev b'kodeshim shu lokeh. This is something that's been bothering people from the beginning of the Masechet. Understand, the Kohen messes up someone's korban. Okay, assuming we're going to get to a big machloket. Is it the Kohen or is it the owner of the sacrifice? But if a Kohen does a machshava and messes up someone's korban, like a machshava lo lishma or pigul, he gets lashes. We finally see responsibility for the Kohen who does this. Okay, we're going to get to later. So you have to also pay, compensate. But right now we're telling he gets lashes, according to Rab Meri, who basically quotes Rabbi Yanai. Talmud Lamar lo yechashev. It's a lo tase. We get a negative commandment. Negative commandments you get lashes for. You might say there's no action. We're going to get there. Amalei Rav Ashi le Rab Meri. Lav shein b'masehu. B'chol lav shein b'maseh. Lo kina lav. What do you mean you don't get lashes for something without an action associated with it? You do an action, even if we hold that you have to say it in words. Speech is not an action. To which he answers, Amarle, Rabbi Yehuda hida. Amar lav shein b'maseh lo kina lav. So Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Meri says this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that lav shein b'maseh lo kina lav. There's a famous machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. If there's a lav that doesn't have an action associated with it, we generally hold you don't get lashes, but Rabbi Yehuda thinks you do. And this matches Rabbi Yehuda's position. And then we have an answer to our question that, Rabbi Meri is holding, or Rabbi Yana is holding by Rabbi Yehuda's position. But interestingly, they all think that it's a negative prohibition that the Kohen does. It's just a matter, is he going to get lashes for it or not? That's the machloket. But everyone agrees that he's transgressed a negative prohibition. Okay, new Mishnah. Zaklal. Here's the rule. And this connects with what we've been talking about. With one of the issues we've been discussing. Okay, you do one of the four main avodot that we've been discussing. Okay, so you're doing this in order to eat something that is generally eaten. You say, I'm doing this in order to eat this part. Or laktir davar shedar kol laktir, or to burn part of it on the altar. Chutzlin kamo, and your thought is, I'm going to burn this or eat this outside the right place where it's allowed to be eaten. Pasul ve'ein bo karet. That's what we learned already. Chutzlin kamo is disqualified, but there's no karet. Chutz lizmano, if it's a thought, I'm going to eat it beyond the designated time. Pigul v'chayavim halav karet. Then it's pigul, and you're going to get karet. Ubevad she'akriv hamatir k'mitzvato. But it has to be that everything else was done the way it's supposed to be done. Okay, so now, right, the matir was brought like it's supposed to be, meaning the blood was sprinkled on the altar like it should have been. Okay, we're going to see. Ketzad karev matir k'mitzvato. What does this mean that everything was done properly the way it's supposed to? So, some examples. Shachat b'shtika. So you slaughtered it properly, and then kibel v'hilech v'zarak chutz zmano, and then you either accepted the blood or conveyed the blood, or sprinkled the blood outside the designated time. Right, meaning with the thought that you were going to do it with the thought that you were going to do the zrika outside the designated time. O sheshachat chutz lizmano, or you slaughtered it with the thought that you're going to do the blood outside its time, or burn the parts outside their time. V'kibel v'halach v'hilech v'zarak v'shtika. And then you did all the rest of the actions silently without any sort of messed up machshava. Oh, so that's going to be pigul because there's only one thing wrong with it. Oh, sheshachat v'kibel v'hilach v'zarak chutz l'zmano. Or you did even all four actions with the thought that you're going to sprinkle the blood or burn the parts on the altar or eat it outside the right framework. Zeu amakriv amatir k'mitzvato, and then it will be pigul, it will be disqualified, and you'll get karet for eating the meat. Ketzad lo karev amatir k'mitzvato, but what's an example where it wasn't done properly? So, where you won't get karet. Shachat chutzim komo, so if you did the shchita with an intent you're going to sprinkle the blood outside the right place, so you already messed it up with a different messed up machshava, then kibel v'hilech v'zarak chutz l'zmano, and then you had a machshava in one of the other actions of a chutz l'zmano. Oh, sheshachach chutz l'zmano, you started, it doesn't matter the order, you started with chutz l'zmano, kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz l'mkomo, and then you ended with one of the later actions with a machshava chutz l'mkomo. So it doesn't matter the order here, either which way you have some other disqualification, it's not pigul, okay? Or again, it's disqualified, but you're not going to get karet for it. Oh, another example where you won't get karet. Sheshachach v'kibel v'hilach v'zarak chutz l'mkomo, or you did any of those actions outside the designated time without, and then, or, any of them, and then you did a chutz l'zmano machshava. Or hapesach v'chatat shechatan shelo l'shma, which we know is disqualified. V'kibel v'halach v'zarak chutz l'zmano. So first you slaughtered it, shelo l'shma, and then now we're combining lo lishma with pigul, and then you had a pigul machshava. No, that's also not going to be pigul. Oh, sheshachach chutz l'zmano, or you had a pigul machshava at the shchita, and then write the opposite order, kibel v'hilach v'zarak shelo lishman, and then you did something shelo lishman. Oh, sheshachach kibel v'halach v'zarak daman shelo lishman, or you did shchita kabbalah or zrika, or any of those shelo lishman, and some other part of it chutz l'zmano. All those zeu shelo karev amatir k'mitzvato. That is disqualified for other reasons. It's not going to be pigul. If you eat that meat, you won't get karet for it. What about le'chol k'zayit b'chutz, k'zayit l'machal, or k'zayit l'machar, k'zayit b'chutz? What if you do, I'm going to eat, so while you're slaughtering, you think, I'm going to eat one k'zayit worth outside, and one k'zayit tomorrow, or k'zayit tomorrow, and k'zayit b'chutz, or one outside. Again, the order doesn't matter. K'zayit k'chatzi zayit b'chutz, k'chatzi zayit l'machar. Half I'm going to eat, half is zayit outside and half a zayit tomorrow, or kachatzi zayit lamachar, kachatzi zayit b'chutz, pasul ve'embo karet. We learned already. Machshavot join to disqualify, but you're not going to have pigul because you don't have a kazayit of chutz l'zmano, which is what you need. That's Tanakama. Comes Rabbi Yehuda and disagrees a little bit. He says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda zakla, kol shemachshavet hazman kadman machshavet hamakom, pigul v'chayvin alav karet. Machshavet hazman comes first, and first you thought chutz l'zmano, that's pigul. And later, we don't care if you did some other psul machshava later, like the Mishnah had set up. It doesn't matter the order. It does matter the order, he said. If you start with chutz l'zmano, that's pigul. Anything else after is irrelevant. Okay, we're going to have a big machloket about this machloket. We'll get to there in another minute. So then it will be pigul and chayvim alav karet. But in machshavet hamakom, kadman machshavet hazman, but if first you messed it up because you had a machshava that doesn't make it karet, right, like outside the right place, then pasul ve'embo karet. Okay, then it will be pasul and there's no karet. The chachamim omrim, this is just to kind of clarify, and some people say this is to say this is the way paskin, like Tanakama, zev is a pasul ve'embo karet. Both are disqualified but don't have karet. It doesn't matter the order, you're not going to get karet either which way. Last part of the Mishnah, le'chol kachatzi zayit ulaktir. Kachatzi zayit, if you split it as you think I'm gonna eat half a zayit outside the right, time, and burn half a zayit outside the right time, kasher. She'en achilav aktsara mitzarfim. That kind of thing doesn't join because you have to have a thought that you're going to sprinkle actually I should say eat a half a kazayit and eat a half a kazayit outside the right time, outside the right place. But if you try to combine eating and burning, those two don't combine at all. Amar Ilfa comes the Gemara and starts off, and we're going to deal with this a lot more in the next stuff. Ilfa says machloket b'shtei avodot. The machloket of Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is in two different avodot. Okay, if you start off with chutz l'zmano and then you move to chutz l'mkomo, that's when there's a machloket between them. That Rabbi Yehuda will say that's pigul because you did the whole first avoda with pigul only, and then you did something else. But if while you're slaughtering you think I'm going to also chutz l'zmano and chutz l'mkomo, for sure then you're not only disqualifying it because of chutz l'zmano, and you're not going to get karet. But Rabbi Yochanan amar af b'avodah achat machloket. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says even b'avodah achat there's going to be a machloket, and we're going to leave this for tomorrow. We're going to get into this much more tomorrow, so we're going to stop here because it's going to basically just kind of get started on something that works out for Ilfa. It doesn't really make sense to Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll get to that in tomorrow's stuff. Okay, so what do we have today? Really, the big juicy thing about pigul. How do we know that pasuk, right? Where do we learn chutz l'zmano and chutz l'komo? The chutz l'zmano you get karet, chutz l'komo you don't. In the end, Rava gets it right after all these unsuccessful attempts. Rava gets it from that one pasuk, has both, but also says you only get karet for one, and then we proved which one. From there, we got into all sorts of other drashot in that pasuk, and some people who think it's not even talking about machshava in that pasuk. It's actually talking about eating the meat. If you eat it on the third day, the korban is disqualified, even though most opinions seem to go against that. And then we have Ben Azai's drashot, right? That led us. All these drashot led us to other people's drashot. Oh, by the way, Darsha is supposed to be the other way, and we went through different drashot about what we learned from mainly that one pasuk and the different drashot on that pasuk. We got off a little bit into the ones in Kedoshim. What did we learn from that? And from there, we got into this big machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, about when the Mishnah basically, which describes you're going to get karet specifically for chutz l'zmano, not chutz l'komo, but if it's combined, you're actually not going to get. It's not going to get karet at all for eating the meat. But Rabbi Yehuda thinks not if you started with pigul. And then we ended up with this ilfa of Rabbi Yochanan machloket. Is that in two different avodot the machloket, or is it even in avodah achat? Rabbi Yehuda still thinks it's not. It's going to be pigul if you started with chutz l'zmano. And we'll deal with that and grapple with that in tomorrow's stuff. Wishing everyone a good day on Hoshana Raba and also a Chag Sameach.